Well, welcome back to our session this afternoon on moral injury and mental health from a lived experience perspective. And today I've got with me Ingrid Ozols, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for now 10 years. So it's been quite a while. We've become firm friends as well as, deep colleagues. Welcome, Ingrid, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kathy, and it's a joy to be working with you again. Even though it doesn't feel like work, it feels very much like sharing of souls and sharing of humanity.
Yeah.
And that's why I love participating in your beautiful work, because it ends up being about us sharing our humanness, and all of these complex life experiences really need that perspective of let's go back and remember who we are.
Which leads to moral injury and mental health. I mean, moral injury, as we've spoken about, we can bear witness, participate, or know something has happened, or transgression. It's often a leadership failure. Most people that suffer from moral injury express extreme anger, deep guilt, and shame. The research, as we've said all the way throughout today, is still very young. The good thing about all of this is that it's a multidisciplinary approach. So for the first time, we've got lots of people interlapping and doing research in areas, which is a very positive thing. For me, I see it playing out a lot in domestic and family violence and also in workplace bullying, because they're very similar behaviours. But the thing about it is, and that's really why I want to talk to you, Ingrid, is I see it as being human. I mean, moral distress is a normal reaction for all of us. When it's profound, it does move into moral injury. But how do you feel, because it often coexists with other mental health issues such as PTSD, for example, do you feel it is understood within the mental health community?
That's a really tough question because of the emotion behind what that means to some people. And it's a word that is only being started to be used recently, and only in certain parts of the mental health and suicide prevention sector. And the social movement that has made such a massive difference to mental health and suicide prevention, and how we talk about it, our attitudes and behaviours. And sadly, our system is the one that's the lagging behind the most, and we know it's not great. But the whole concept of moral injury, we've only now just started to talk about, because there is such a divide of trauma within those of us who have been touched directly or indirectly by mental ill health, by trauma or neurodiversity or humanness or the human condition. And the challenge has been is because we've not talked about this for centuries, since time began. There's always been some form of discrimination, some form of oppression, that we just did not talk about these emotional or psychological things. And so now, as we're becoming a more sophisticated, hopefully sophisticated, aware group of advocates, and now trying to educate community about the challenges that mental health and mental ill health and poor mental health brings, has in itself created a storm where there are some members of the community who have been so traumatized by the system. There are clearly many harms that have been done to people through the system of mental health care, who have been damaged, who have been so traumatized by a system that was actually not a system. We actually even have debates about, well, it's sort of a tapestry of, or a patchwork of a whole lot of different systems trying to come together to help people. And yet there is that voice that says, no, you haven't done anything for me. You've made my trauma even worse. In fact, you've made new trauma. And now, as time goes on and as generations start to emerge with new learnings and new understandings about this, there is this sense of, hang on, if I'm a professional wanting to help someone, I don't wake up in the mornings to cause harm to people who may be suffering some form of emotional crisis or distress. And sometimes the system itself has enforced practices that have been harmful to not only the person or the patient or the consumer or whatever we call a person. We've had to actually try and develop a way of working together that has actually been very divisive and is still divisive.
It's really interesting because you've touched on.
Yes. My battery's dying. Sorry. I've just got to put it on or it's going to go.
Okay, I'll just stop it there for a minute and we're live. So that gets to a really good point. My son, who's in his early 20s, I mean, now uses language such as, I'm going to have a mental health day today, Mum. I'm going to stay home and look after myself. I'm feeling worn out. I just need to look after me. But we've got systems that are just rigged with red tape that people can't operate out of. And exactly what you said, and it's come up even in the panels, they are knowingly harming people rather than setting people free. Do you see a way around this?
I wish there was an easy answer to that question.
Yeah, I know.
But ultimately, we need to work with what we've got in a compassionate way. And I've heard experiences or some of our clinicians saying, okay, we may have a person who is in involuntary treatment care, but that doesn't mean we can or have to take everything away. Let's talk to the person as a person and say, okay, we might not, none of us like you being in this situation and we can't perhaps change this particular situation, but what we can do in a human way is talk to that person to say, well, here are the options within the constraints of what we're dealing with. And we're here because we do care. And let's walk you through some options within those constraints. Now, it still may not be the ideal for many people. However, it's a starting point, and our clinicians are certainly trying. And I think they're finding it very difficult, and they themselves are having the lived experience of mental health issues and trauma and PTSD, because people are anti-clinicians are coming on and saying, well, hang on, but you did this to me, and therefore you're to blame and you're the evil one. So there's these connotations of everyone being unkind because they're in trauma or whatever the situation is, but there's no one thing to blame. Human nature is complicated. If we can take a breath and a step back and remember that humanity is what brings us together, our language is important, our intention is important, and trying our best. That's all we can do with what we've got at times.
So I guess the Industrial Revolution made sure that we had, there's efficiencies and productivity and more and more and more. And then the information age. And what you're really saying is we've got to scale all of that back a little bit around mental health and lived experience and treat each other as human beings. So it's almost like, when somebody wasn't well, you'd knock on the door and say, do you need a cup of tea? I'm going to the shops. This sense of community is what we need to restore in a 2022 way.
Yep. And the challenge, Kathy, is that so many of us are falling into, oh, but that's just too simple. Yet that's just not enough. Well, we've got to start somewhere. And cruelty is not going to help. Being unkind is not going to help the situation anymore. It is back to basics. It is back to connectedness. And sometimes not knowing what to say is okay to say that. And I was with someone, my loved one yesterday, who's who's terminally ill. And for a split second, I forgot all about COVID. And I just reached over to that loved one and put my arm around them and said, I love you. I don't know what to say.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. And I touched them. And I came out thinking, oh, I did the wrong COVID thing. But you know what? I know that I gave that person a priceless gift. He gave me a gift, human touch, human empathy.
Mm-hmm. So last question, because we're sort of running out of time today. What practical thing do you think people can do to actually be more connected with somebody? You know, if we're talking about moral distress, what would you recommend?
I'm trying not to cry, to be honest. But yet, in a sense, it's okay to cry if that's what we need to do in these difficult times. Oppressing ourselves is actually the worst thing we can do. It's the old oxygen mask analogy. We need to put the oxygen mask on ourselves, and if it means having a cry, that's okay. Whoever we are, wherever in life we may be, it's okay to show emotion. And I think taking a breath, going back to those basics, breathe, pause, and just feel being in our own skin. And I have to say, for me, putting my feet firmly on the ground, holding my chair or holding something real makes a difference for me. Everyone's different. Everyone reacts or responds to something differently. And if you can go and be lucky enough to get a hug, that's priceless.
Well, on that note, Ingrid, I've got to say a big thank you and a big virtual hug for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.